Greetings, everyone. Joy Brooks with Email and Coffee. I'm talking with Stephen Engler, and we're going to be talking about Stephen.
Yeah, well, I'm a professor of religious studies at Mount Royal University in Calgary, Canada, and I work mainly with religions in Brazil, especially spirit incorporation religions like Kardecism, Spiritism, Umbanda, but also Candomblé, not that there's really spirits there, and Kimbanda, and also some Neo-Pentecostalism, which overlaps a bit. I'm off again to Brazil this summer to do some more research, and I have a blog on religious topics called Religioning, and that's on Substack.
Very interesting. I did have a moment to look at some of those writings, and there was one thing that stuck out at me, and it is something that I've said for a long time. It's theodicies and always let's see if I could say it, sociodicies. So for me, I've always said that religion was really the first politics.
Well, that's an interesting point. In one sense, what is the beyond? And beyond is always relative to where we sit. So you and I talking over a distance like this would have been some kind of magical religious experience a couple of centuries ago. So if we'd like to imagine there's an absolute, a heaven, and that's a useful idea. But really, the way we encounter religion is encountering moments that are outside the normal, outside the ordinary. And that means we often find it in social relationships.
I don't think that you could take religion, let's call it culture. You can't take religion out of culture or culture out of religion. So the same religion within another culture is going to have a different flavor. And that's that sociodicy.
Yeah.
And in many cases, the taboos, the things that the religion is teaching you to do is that culture, is that primary politics, where it's not the president or the queen, it's the shaman or the leader that says no, mustn't do that. Bring the judges up. Let's get the old women. We're all going to talk to you right now. So these things, as we get more civilized, these things get more complicated.
Yeah. Well, let's come back to that word theodicy is always sociodicy. Theodicy is basically the idea that life's tough. People get sick and you wonder how it makes sense. And to say that it's sociodicy is to say that we look to social relationships for those same answers. So when we have a problem, if a child is sick, if we're sick, if death threatens, we try to make sense of it, and we also try to fix the problem. And that's where we find the first and most important overlap between talking to other people, experts, family members, and talking to divine beings.
What's you mentioned many spiritual groups in Brazil, of which I won't even pretend that I know or can pronounce. So can you talk a little bit about any of them and what, not what necessarily they believe, but what makes them what they are? What's their meaning? Okay, I didn't mean to use that word. What makes them what they are?
Well, they mix up a lot. So let me start with the one I study most, which is Umbanda. And Umbanda begins around 100 years ago. The origin's not entirely clear, and there's different stories. But as we find it in Brazil today, it's a whole bunch of different things. But in general, it's a mix of Kardecist Spiritism. So right there, we have to talk about where that comes from. And also a mix of West African ideas, which are found in religions like Candomblé in Brazil and Santeria in Cuba. And I think we can understand that part. We were fairly aware of that. But what's Kardecism? Kardecism is an offshoot of spiritualism, which begins in the United States in the 1840s. The seances, the tables rising as voices from beyond the grave communicate to us. And a lot of spiritism is about talking to dead people, which is to say, talking to people just like us, except their address has changed. So that's a very positive view of death. But Kardecism is an esoteric tradition where it adds on to this idea of talking to people at our level beyond the grave, talking to people who are more spiritually advanced than we are. So Kardecism believes that God creates spirits, and that's it. There are no demons, no angels, just God and spirits. And all spirits begin very lowly, very far from God, simple. And the purpose of our life is over many incarnations on many worlds to slowly evolve spiritually back to God. Classic esoteric belief, a move away from God and back to God. So then that adds a whole complex set of ideas to spiritualism. It's now a esoteric philosophy. And it's spread throughout Latin America, where it continues to be very prominent, especially in Brazil. A lot of people don't know about it, but it overlaps with curanderismo in the United States. And then Umbanda is a mix of this idea of spiritual progress with African entities. So mediums incorporate a spirit, a very positive spirit. The spirit is there to help. They're doing charity work. They're trying to help us grow. And so when you go to one of these rituals, it's almost like a hospital. It's a clinic. You wait your turn, you get a number. They call up 10 more people. You go up and you're taken to a person who you may know socially, but the body of that person is incorporates a spirit. And you talk to the spirit. So it's the same voice of, I know people personally, and it's sort of their voice, but it's talking differently, and the body language is different, and what they say is different. And people talk about their problems, health problems, relationship problems. They might be given a ritual. So in a way, it's a medical clinic. And in the back room, they often have different types of therapy, crystal therapy in more new age clinics, or non-cutting spiritual surgery with scalpels to remove things, but no blood, no cutting. And in a sense, is that a religion or is it a healthcare clinic? The things overlap at that point. And when you talk to people that go to regular doctors in many places, the faith people place in physicians begins to overlap a bit with religion as well. So I like to always start with what are people looking for rather than what are the ideas. So if you begin in that room, it's a very interesting experience to participate in.
How does this, or does it, interact with Catholicism? Because one would think, oh, South America's Catholic.
The numbers of Catholics are dropping, but everything interacts with Catholicism. Catholicism is so in
Again, it becomes a culture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can't get away from it. I mean, even if you're not a believer, religion shapes you if you're grown up in a family that takes it seriously. And I think that's, belief aside, that's a very valuable place to look for values. So Candomblé, for example, the orishas or deities have traditionally been associated one-to-one with certain saints.
Okay.
In Umbanda, Jesus is often a statue of Jesus, a statue of the Virgin Mary is right there on the altar. No, those entities don't incorporate, but people praise them during rituals. And there's some Catholic saints appear as spirits, especially Cosme and Damiens in on the day of the child spirits, they incorporate. So yeah, and you ask people who are going to the rituals, what's your religion? They're often Catholic. They're there for religious services in another religion, and they don't see any contradiction there at all. And there are elderly Catholic women, fewer nowadays. There used to be many more, who work with the spirits of dead people as well. If you like, I can tell you a fascinating story about a spirit who circulates in this town where I do research.
Anecdote away.
Decades ago, a young girl named Medium sadly died of food poisoning from food she ate at a birthday party. And that was such a tragic event. It shocked the community, obviously shocked everyone who knew this family. And in the decades since there, the spirit of this little girl appears to Catholic benzedeiras or blessers. So when I finally get my book on Umbanda published, I have a debt to take a Barbie doll to the tomb of this young girl in the graveyard. And that tomb is filled with offerings of dolls and flowers. Her spirit also appears in Kardecist groups that work with spirits, both higher level spirits, but also spirits of the dead. Her spirit also appears in Umbanda groups. So in this one community, we have this. You can't really say we don't know who the spirit is. We know exactly who the spirit is. We know where she is buried. But she appears in several different religions, and people go to her tomb, even if they're not members of any of those religions, for help, because she is seen as someone who is very powerful, very caring, and a tragic figure that people can identify with. So where do you draw the lines and say there's this religion, there's that religion? When you start with asking, what do people do? What they do often crosses lines between religions.
Mm. And you've had conversations with spirits?
All the time. Not
Well,
so much here in Calgary, though there are a couple of there are Kardecists and one Umbanda group here in Calgary. But yes, I
so
do.
you
And
talk to dead people.
I am a dead person.
Oh, there you
From their
go.
point of view. We're all just spirits. At this moment, we're here in our bodies and we're here to learn, we're here to grow, but we will disincorporate and reincorporate. So from the point of view of Umbanda and Kardecism, I'm just talking to someone who's like a teacher, but there's no fundamental difference between them and me,
Hmm.
except the fact that I need to learn my lessons a bit better.
Don't we all? So what? Oh gosh, I can often say that you're talking to me, but actually you're talking to my mother because there are times where she's echoing in my head, and I say, "Oh, that would have been something my mother would have said," and I say it. So yeah, I mean, I think, and that's only because of proximity. Obviously, I grew up with my mother, but do I say things of my great 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 grandmother? I don't know. Do I listen? I tend to be superstitious. The concept that of spirits fascinates me, and how you explain it, is it logical? But I would say that makes sense to me. Otherwise, where does all this consciousness go? I think outside of our bodies, it's very crowded out there. Think of all the
Yeah,
people that have been on the planet.
I mean, what do we have scientific evidence for? Not much
Hmm.
there, because science always has to leave open possibilities, but even though it doesn't have spiritual substance on its list of tools that it can hypothesize with. So I always start with, I sort of make two moves in my teaching and in my research. And the first is not to ask what's true, what corresponds to reality, what is the one true account of what exists and what causes what, because that's very important. But a different perspective is better. What works for people? What allows people to live a more fulfilling life, to deal with the challenges that life presents them. To ask whether it's true or not is kind of beside the point. It's important in some contexts, but when you're studying religions, you have to ask, how could people think these things which are very different than what I think? So that's the first step, is to focus on the practical side, not the does it exist, does it not exist, which God is the true God, those questions. And the second thing I do is to begin at that point with people in their practice. What are they doing? Not to begin with my definition of what Catholicism looks like or how Protestantism is different than Catholicism, but to start with what people are trying to do and what tools they're using to try to do it. And then along the way, I may decide, yes, I find myself in a traditional sort of Catholic context, or I might not. But the labels come later. So begin with the practice in those two senses, what people are doing, and begin by describing what they do, not labeling what they
Mm.
do.
Do having not been in Brazil, so I'm not familiar with the culture, but do they go into when a spirit is coming? Is it just an idle conversation? So you'd be talking to Bob and suddenly Bob's, I don't know who, or do they? Speaking of I don't know who, do they? How does it interact with day to day? Like you go meet somebody in the market and you're talking with them. Are you suddenly talking with someone else? How does it work? Yes and
It's
no.
ritualized.
Okay.
Two answers there. First, in a given tradition, there's sort of a set of rules for what's normal in that tradition. So even in Umbanda, which can vary a lot, sometimes there's very intense drumming and the energy in the room goes up, and the mediums in Umbanda are dressed in white and they're just walking around, normal walk. But as the energy goes, first the leader of the house will sort of usually move towards the altar, and then the incorporation happens. And in some groups, you can tell how intense that experience. The body just shudders as that powerful entity descends. And then the person's body language changes. And from the body language, you can often tell what type of spirit it is, the accent they speak with, and their voice shifts. But in other groups, still Umbanda, there'll be new age flute music playing, people whispering very quietly. And they'll walk forward and the medium will touch the altar and go, and step back once. And that's it. Much less dramatic a transition from the medium to the spirit. But it depends on the ritual. So one way to, without asking is it true or not, you say rituals are like plays. You can read the cues and each script is a bit different. So that's one way to answer that question. So it doesn't usually happen in the street. There are some communities of Umbanda, Macumba, Kimbanda, where the spirits will go out to a bar and drink with their people. But usually it's in the ritual context. The other thing I think that is important to keep in mind here is that if we stand back and not even say religion, not say spirit, say where else in the world do we find this kind of thing where suddenly a person is speaking with a different voice, their body shifts? Where do we find that? And the answer is we find it in the majority of cultures throughout the world. And that might seem odd. So what do the psychologists make with that? If we look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the 4th edition, the previous edition, they didn't quite know what to do with that. It was sort of in an appendix saying we're still talking about this. In the DSM-5, it says right there, it's a type of dissociative trance state, which can be a psychological disorder if it messes up someone's life. But it says quite explicitly, in many cultures, this is considered normal. And where it's a normal part of the cultural beliefs, it is not a psychological problem. It's just part of how that culture thinks. So from that point, we could imagine, this is one story we could think of to try to make sense of it. Not to say it's true or not, that the human mind has this capacity, some people more than others, to dissociate and to have a sense of a different voice speaking through us, a different entity in our body, compulsions that aren't our own. That's just something, for some reason, maybe it's an evolved capacity. That's something people do. And then the interesting question is, what do cultures do with that? And we could say, well, different cultures deal with it in different ways. And that's why we'll find some types of exorcisms, even on the edges of Islam, the Zar ceremony, and spirit possession religions in Vietnam or in China, or in new Japanese and new Korean religions, or in Kardecism, or in Umbanda, or in Candomblé. And the list goes on and on and on. And in every case, the rituals are different, the stories are different, the labels are different. The idea whether we're talking to someone just like us or someone higher than us who's still human, or someone who's a god or someone who's an angel, even in channeling in the New Age movement, or UFO religions where it's an extraterrestrial that comes into someone's body. But if we start that idea that, maybe this is just normal and all we have to do is ask questions about, and given that this is normal, we ask, well, what do people do with it in different contexts? I find that a useful point of view. And then my job is to sort of sit back and see what these people in this room think is normal.
Mm. You know, I tend to think that religion for humanity, religion is required in some shape and form of it, because once we are faithless, everything crumbles. We there is no purpose without some amount of esotericism, with something awesome. What I don't know what word we want to stick with it, but for people who tell me and have told me I'm an atheist, I'm like, okay, so you have a religion. You believe that there's no God. That's your religion. They're like, no, because they don't like the word religion. So that, you know, but if the stigma is atheism, you're essentially telling me that your system of belief is X, Y, and Z. It may not be structured. You may not go to a place, a place of rich of you don't congregate with other atheists. But the point is that I think we all need something, regardless
Yeah.
of culture, even communism.
Yeah, there's several different things going on there. One is that when people use the word religion, they usually think of their religion, and other religions are something that have to look like their religion. So when Christians went to many countries, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, they often said, these people don't have religion. Well, they didn't have Christianity.
Mhm.
But if we define religion by taking the usual set of things we call religion, atheists don't have ritual. And ritual is often a key part of religion. What is ritual? It's a way of, works like tradition. It's a way of doing things not because you want to do it, not because anyone else in the room wants to do it, because this is what is given to us to do. So ritual has that sense of acting, moving your body, speaking words for reasons that are not your own. In a way, you're incorporating not a spirit, but the tradition. And that is a very humbling stance. Imagine a Muslim, many Muslims who pray 5 times a day at a certain town. Their watch goes off, it's time to pray. You're moving in very restricted ways, set ways, not because you choose those actions, but because you choose to follow the ritual. And that's to give over authority to someone else. That's, I think, a key point at where values get incorporated in children. So if we look at that ritual sense, then we can distinguish between something like atheism and an agnosticism that doesn't have ritual. See, in that sense, it's not religious. But at a deeper level, you're totally right that atheism is a faith perspective. You can't prove God doesn't exist any more than you can prove that God does exist. It's not, because what you have is an idea of what proof is. So even agnosticism is a faith position, but there it's a faith in criteria of what counts as evidence. This is what the evidence I would need to prove that God exists. Your religion doesn't give me that evidence, so I'm going to put a question mark there. That's still faith in a set of rules for how we construct knowledge.
Mm. But a purely secular world will begin to build ritual, because again, I believe we can't live without it. We look for it in our own lives. So whether it's an exercise routine, or I go to a therapist every week, or whatever it is, the secular person who will not believe in a religion, will not associate themselves with a religion, and will deny God, will still build ritual into their life. They'll search for it. If they don't search for it, lots of interesting things begin to happen with a society that has no awe.
Yeah, but there are scales, right?
Mhm.
Rituals can be more or less open to something beyond me. When I brush my teeth, for some reason I always start on the top left. Is that a ritual? I mean, only in a very superficial sense. Certainly, people will go with friends. They like to have the same sort of birthday party. We always have the same people over for New Year's. We could call those rituals. But in addition to the idea of repeated action, what makes ritual more religious, there's no sharp line where it starts being religious, because religion is a very open-ended concept like culture. But where it starts being, we could say, religious, is where we see the structure of those repeated actions, the reason we keep doing this thing, as in something beyond us in a radical sense. Not beyond me like we're echoing my grandmother, not beyond me in a sense like, well, that's just the way that my business does its Christmas party, but beyond in a sense that our sense of meaning, of the meaning of our life, blurs off into a direction that we honor and respect. So you have to sort of let go of the sense that you're in charge. You're doing it because you choose to do it this way. And that is where religion starts to enter into it. The sense that you can do action that is deeply meaningful for reasons that are literally beyond you.
Mm-hmm. I guess I'm beating a dead horse, but I think that people need that. It's a requirement, because if we don't have that structure provided for us, you are a Catholic. If you don't have that, you will create it around you. And if you cannot create it around you, I don't know what happens to an individual. I really don't think that they're whole.
Yeah, I take what you're saying totally, but I take it in a different direction. I don't think people need it, like they're gonna fall apart if they don't have it. I think it's useful and it's dangerous not to have it because people fall apart without it. I
Mm-hmm.
think that ritual functions to unite people in groups.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what we've seen for the last 500 years is, in various and now accelerating ways, an erosion of the social groups that performed that role of a beyond. Like, you're a member of this group, you're a member of this town. But now, well, to get a job, I'm going to have to move to the city and I need an apprenticeship there. So the community starts to break apart. And we've seen the family itself begin to break up. The kid's got to go to university here, and I got a job, part-time job there, so we'll see each other on weekends. And one of the things that religion and ritual do, in a purely functional sense, is unite people. And they unite people in large part because people are willing to say, these are things we do because we do them,
Mm-hmm.
not because we choose to do them, because it is given to us to do them. So as ritual becomes more and more individualized, the way I choose to do things, my personal ritual. This week, I'm going to read this book by a Hindu guru. Next week, I'm going to reread the Tao Te Ching. When religion becomes a mix and match, sort of commodified version of feeling, of filling whatever needs this week I think are important for me, then
Mm-hmm.
ritual doesn't serve that classic role of uniting people. It becomes just a tool for whatever self-interest you happen to have at the top of your
Mm-hmm.
list.
The intellectual perhaps can manage that. So the intellectual, and when I say that, the intellectual individual who seeks learning can manage that to some extent. But at some point, they're going to want to talk about what they're reading with someone else who's read the same book. Otherwise, they're in a vacuum, and at some point in time, I think it's going to snap.
Yeah, but you can find a WhatsApp group for that, a
I'm
TikTok
serious.
channel
It's
for
like
that.
I need to belong to a book club. This is what I'm saying. People, if what I see in the world today is many people will say, "Oh, I don't believe in God," and I don't ask them what they believe in, but I do look at what they're doing, and they're either very into their career, and I'm like, well, they're creating a ritual around their career. It's like if that career ends, they have no identity, or they belong to some sort of they go to the gym every day, and religiously they go to the gym every day. The people around them go to gyms. They eat a particular food, and they're very into the foodie thing. I mean, everybody's into something, right? And this started happening, what, in the past, I suspect 100 years. Uh, you know, science versus religion, where, oh, there's no God, but I believe in science. whereby it's intellectualized. Now you have to find what it is you believe in. That's not easy.
Yeah, I think with ritual,
Finding
for
your own
example,
tribe, in other words, out of nowhere, thin air. I'm going to find your tribe. Where are they?
yeah, I think what makes individualism individualism. I did a search from, I came up with 70, 80 different, affective individualism, on and on and on. What is individualism? In terms of what we're talking about, it's the point where it isn't really a ritual because you're doing it because you decide to do it. Then it's
Okay.
not really a ritual. It has to be you're doing it because you have to do it. You're told to do it. It's part, but then who told you to do it? That question, the answer to that question is what religion is about. We do this ritual because Jesus said, do this in memory of me. Then you're not doing it because you choose to do it, or you're doing it because it's part of our cultural tradition. For generations, we have done this. You talk to people who are a member of the Siksika First Nation here in Canada, the elders. I was at a wonderful talk once with the elders there, a group of people from my university, and they described they have a buffalo robe with symbols. It's the history of their nation. And one of the symbols was for the residential schools. And the elder said, another elder and I made up this symbol, and now it's part of this. And I said, well, if you made it up, I was pretty sure I knew how he was going to answer. If you just made it up, then how is it tradition? He said, well, because we're elders. We live the values of our community. Tradition's not old and dead. Tradition is alive and well. But what makes it tradition is that honoring of the values that were given down to us. That's what tradition is, honoring what is beyond us, not living in the past. I thought that was a very beautiful way to say it.
Um, yeah, there's something to be said. There's something to be said for traditionalism, ritualism. I mean, I have always appreciated people's cultures, whatever, like what they believe, on a tribal level or on a country, it just keeps going out. So what it seems, what South America sounds like to me is that it's held on to its traditions, blended them over the past 200 years as new peoples, and I'm not going to call it colonialism, although I've said it. Now that I've said it, I've said it. New peoples have been fused into their culture. It's a living thing. It doesn't just turn one switch off and another switch on. And not only that, but we have, like you mentioned, there's African, there's a lot of things happening, which is healthy, right? These things are healthy. What I tend to think is not healthy is when, I guess we'll just call them nihilists. Well, even that's a religion. People who say no to everything and try to break everything apart. I read something that you wrote, or maybe it was something that somebody else wrote, and it dawned on me that European Marxism is a product of the Judeo-Christian European traditions, where it's an
Of course.
apocalyptic vision. Like what happens after the end times? We're all equal. There's no greed. There's no, everything. We all live in a community.
Yeah, absolutely. That Marxism is a type of Judeo-Christian apocalypticism in economic terms, and people often think that Maoism in China is like Marxism, but what you need to think there is you have to relate it not to Judeo-Christian end times, but to White Lotus apocalypticism in an indigenous Chinese version of the end of the world. Then Maoism, and it's different from Marxism, begins to make more sense. But the point you made about Latin America is an important one. Now, to be speculative, these are ideas I throw out sometimes in class just to get people thinking. But why Latin America? Why Africa? Why is, let's flip it around, Western Europe less bound by tradition, or why was the Enlightenment that threw tradition out to some extent, sparked mainly there. And one way to answer to that is economic factors lead to an increasing emphasis on a rational bureaucracy, which leads to the creation of a state and now to corporations and even individuals with more economic power than states. That can only happen with a rationalized system which will control the flow of money, of commodities. So you get structures that work very efficiently, which means that value becomes a function of that structure. So let's come back to Brazil. Why is culture, tradition stronger there? And the answer would probably be because it's rooted in the family. And why is it rooted in the family and even in local religions? One big reason is because the state wasn't as successful of getting its agents, the police, the accountants, even the doctors out. That network of power wasn't able to spread as well through society for various reasons. So people had to lean on their own resources, and their own resources were first and foremost family. And one of the key things that Catholicism brings with the idea of godfathers and godmothers is an extension of family, where the godfather is someone you can count on to, you help them, they'll help you. So if you think that in the vacuum of these structures, people maintain tradition more, that both helps us understand the importance of family, and it also offers a certain critical perspective on the downsides of an increasingly globalized economy.
There's a lot to unpack there. There really is. Not taking capitalism as a dirty word or as the proper way to go. It's just what it is, just the word itself. The concept of capitalism promotes a different culture. But American capitalism versus Canadian capitalism versus European capitalism, and even let's really muck it up, Chinese capitalism. So we've got a lot of concepts of value. Like today, everything is value. And you have to put a price tag on it, and you have to make money. Joey, how much money are you making from your podcast? None. None? You need a coach. You need to figure it out. And everything needs value, or it has no value. Overcapitalized everything. That's when it becomes a destructive force. When I don't even know how to even explain it. It sort of invades everything you do.
Yeah, I made that was the heart of one of my recent blog posts on the commodification of religion. And I think that it's a mistake to focus on putting a price tag on things. That's not the issue that is the problem. The other thing that happens with market transactions is the commodification of everything. So that's treating everything as interchangeable. So even with coffee, there's different types of coffee, but a pound of Arabica coffee from Colombia is a pound of Arabica coffee from Colombia. And oil and water and sand. Commodity is when a unit is interchangeable with any other unit. So if we think of your podcast in commodity terms, every single episode you ever done has the same value because they're all types of the same thing. But what do we do there? We forget the fact that every podcast is a different conversation that's drawing and creating and contributing to a different social network. And if religion becomes commodified, then picking up a ritual here, shopping on a ritual there, going over here for healing, reading that book here, it's all the same. And that means what we've done is cut the ties to social relationships, because things that are rooted in community can't be reduced to each other. They cannot be commodified. They mean something different because they mean in a context, a network of social relationships. So even in Brazil, the There are many local parade traditions. People get in the streets in costumes and march. And they're different in every community. They reflect the difference of that community and the history of that community. So you could travel in Minas Gerais, for example, to 100 different towns, and it's 100 different rituals. They're just not the same. But then once the government gets their hands on it and starts to turn it into a tourist item, then the differences get erased. It becomes a type of thing that can be marketed to people. So in the larger cities, that local flavor tradition starts to die out, in part because it's being commodified. But that's not the price tag there. It's the fact that it's being reduced to one more example of this type of product for consumption.
Mhm.
So it's that commodification that I think is the acid to society.
I learned something just now, or something that from what you said, that I was shoving that down everyone's throat, that religion is necessary. But I think now social interaction is required for humanity. And when we don't have that social interaction, no man is an island. We begin.
Absolutely. And then that conversation gets interesting. Why is it required?
Really, why is it required?
I don't know. There's lots of answers. But in terms of what we've been talking about, one of the things that suggests itself is it's required because of the humility of rubbing it up against people who have different ideas than you do. So, I mean, what is a social relationship? You got to get along. You don't really get along with this uncle, but you got to get along. And that is where I sort of talk this idea of theodicy, sociodicy in my Brazilian work, that Brazilians are really good at getting along because you have to, maintaining a healthy social network, a healthy community is more important than what you think. And let's think of the opposite right now. If you don't like someone's comment on a social media, you can just erase them.
Right. And you cancel them,
Right.
and they're out of I've blocked you.
And then you
And
miss the most important part of social relationships, which is this constant, sometimes very irritating reminder that your will, your desire, your interests, your choices are constrained and shaped. And that is what religion does, is what ritual does. Sorry, it's time to pray. Doesn't matter what you want. Your schedule's secondary. God's schedule comes first. Or in 100 little ways, just raising children, they learn from bouncing off you and you learn from bouncing off them,
certainly. So the positivity movement, where everybody needs to be positive around you, or else they're not good. No, they're negative. No. So we've got this positive, and it's so prevalent. And I tend to be,
Yeah.
People say that I'm negative, but I like to stir it up a bit. So I might, in a conversation, just take the devil's advocate and throw it in there, because I like to mess it up a bit. Why is everybody saying this? What about that? Oh, that's not what we're talking about. And I'm at the conversation. Oh, she's so negative. Humans are innovators, and the only reason we innovate is because we're presented with a challenge. If we do not present ourselves with any challenge, it gets very stale very quickly. We become very introspective, and God only knows. Sorry, God only knows what we come up with.
Yeah, take the idea from Darwinian theory. I mean, what is natural selection but, dealing with adversity? And the phrase isn't survival of the most pampered, is it? Love it or hate it. I love the word critique is so important for academics like me, but some people think critique's bad.
No.
But negative critique, personal critique, irrelevant critique, overly caustic critique just shows you're dealing with someone who's a problem, and that's life. But critique is how we grow. Without it, you'd be just stationary. If there isn't friction with other people in your life, then doesn't seem like, I mean, Socrates said the unexamined life isn't worth living. And you could say that the unchallenged life is not worth living.
Yeah, it may be difficult for people to admit, and they may choose less drama in their lives. I understand that. I'm an advocate of, come on, people, can we have a little less drama here? But some amount of drama, and we are all dramatic. Some amount of drama, again, will create a situation where you're discovering something new about yourself, something new about the other person, something new that you didn't think you liked, or you thought you hated,
Yeah.
whatever it is. And I think that the world today that is so hung up on identity, and I suspect that we'll have to define that, but in any case, for those people who are searching, again, they're looking for a tribe. They need to belong to something. And they don't have it. They don't have a family that they feel that they can belong to. Maybe they've, dissed their family and decided that they don't want to belong to their family for whatever reason. And there may be good reasons. I'm not saying the world is perfect, but I'm saying we have a bunch of people and a movement that is seeking a tribe at the same moment that they would say that tribalism is horrible. You shouldn't do that. So they're doing exactly what they don't want to do.
Not exactly. The sociologist Robert Bella and a bunch of people talked about the erosion of social community, and another guy, Putnam, wrote a book called Bowling Alone. And Putnam, Bella came up with the idea of lifestyle enclave, that people used to be part of a community. You live in this town, these are your neighbors, you have to live with them, that's community. And partly because of these economic factors that push to make us consumers who are flexible so that we can use products in very effective and flexible ways and we could be marketed to. Because of a number of factors, people start to join together because, well, I like RVing, so my community is other people who happen to have RVs, which is good, and identity is excellent, but it does lose that sense of a community that is given. When we make our own communities, we run the risk of making communities that miss a lot of the things that a richer, deeper community will give us. And when it comes to trying to avoid stress, I think that the first thing you have to do is to say, well, how can I make my life networked in a more positive way? So when, recent events, we no need to go down the list, over the last decade have made me make decisions. I don't watch TV. I don't watch the news. I don't read news for the most part. I check to see what issues I need to look into. And there's two reasons for that. One, it stresses me out. And two, some of the information is fake. When I do the research, almost every single news story that I've been close enough to know what's going on, the journalist reports are wrong. They're rushed. They're overworked. They're facing deadlines, and they use paper cut, frames to draw out conflict. And so I just couldn't trust the news. I had to do my own research. So now I just research certain issues that I think matter deep. So if you ask me about what's going on in the Ukraine, my one of my brother-in-law's father in Brazil, every time he met me, he'd say, "So what do you think about the war in Ukraine?" And I'd say, "I don't know anything about it because that's not on my list of things I have time to research. And I'm certainly not going to trust what I hear over a beer or on the news. So I literally have no clue. I have no opinion." So it takes some humility to cut ties to things that everyone else thinks is normal that are dysfunctional. And it's challenging to try to build and hang on to a set of networks that's more positive. And maybe it's just a vague echo of tradition lost, or maybe I'm just being self-serving. But I don't see a problem with the identity politics, except the negative side where other people's identity is problematic. I celebrate people who see themselves in a way that is outside the normal that other people think is normal, and find a network to support that. That is positive, that is beautiful. But the toxic side is where other people's identities are on the naughty list.
Mhm. I tend to think that we're all marginalized at some point. So we're all going to find that odd group that someone else says, you do that. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
you know, I have a support group and I have a few friends that do that. Um, so what I'm hearing here and I'm getting out of the whole conversation is that there's an element to tradition, religion, ritual, whatever, that is beyond our control. And then there's things that we, by free will, select. And it's not the free will that we select that may be healthy in a different way or a different discussion, but it's that element of control where we release ourselves to a set of rules that are not ours, that have been handed down, and we blind faith, obey.
Yeah. Or to put it another way, what religion is about is beyondness. That's what the word transcendence means. It's what beyond. Well, beyond what? And that's it. There is no absolute. You know, when, Wayne Gretzky, or is it Mario Lemieux, the greatest hockey player of all time. He's transcendent in some sense, a godlike figure in some very watered down echo of that analogy. So there's beyondness everywhere. And so, we all have people who are so charitable or so wise that they seem at another level. And so every day of our life, we see moments of beyondness. And that, I think, is the key thing, that ritual simply structures that so that you can have a regular dose of a radical beyondness. And I think that's, leaving aside the question of whether it's true or not, I think that's what religion is and what it gives. It gives us a sense of humility, of realizing that our ideas of the way things are and our plans for the way we want things to be, and our decision for what we happen to do at every second of our life is going to run into walls, and there's something more that has a claim on us.
Mm-hmm.
And at the most fundamental level, let's go back to that. You mentioned the word faith earlier on. I think that's a crucial idea. And people often take too much their own narrow religious traditions view of faith, because it's different in Buddhism and Hinduism and Judaism. There are different perspectives on faith. At its heart, faith is trust, and involves both having an idea. You have to have a model in your head of whatever it is you have faith in, but it also involves a letting go, right? And I work a lot with the ideas of an American philosopher, Donald Davidson, who has a different view of what meaning means. And if you sort of push his point of view in this direction of faith, not that he wrote about it, every conversation we ever have with another human being is based on faith, because the words we use are not exact, they don't mean exactly the same thing. What you look up in the dictionary isn't exact. Everyone has a different point of view, and we are all in our own worlds in a sense. So to talk to someone else, first, you have to share a lot of stuff that you can point to in the world around you. That's in the world, in culture. So you have to have a lot in common just to get a conversation off the ground. If an alien turned up and goes bleep, bleep, how would we know that they're even rational beings? Unless we can find enough in common, we can make sense. But in every conversation, every exchange we've had in this conversation, I'm trying to figure out what you're saying by comparing what you're saying. I say, well, if I were in your shoes, because you're coming from a slightly different position, what would I say? Well, if I said what you just said, I can see it. You're coming from that from a different point of view. And that's faith. We have to have the faith that the other person is like us enough to have a conversation. And every moment of contact is a leap of faith in sort of Kierkegaard sense that you will meet this other person somewhere in the middle. So in a way, religion just sort of blows up the encounter that's right there in every encounter we've ever had in our lives. The other is not a radically other. Every other is other.
Every other.
And I think social relationships just give us a way to structure that encounter so we don't lose it in a self-absorbed talking to ourself momentum where we lose that encounter with the other.
So if we take words and we strip the meanings from words, how do we communicate?
Well, that's the thing. What is the meaning of a word? There's no such thing from this philosophical perspective, which I found extremely useful for trying to talk to spirits, right? Because if you think that what a word means is what it points to, I don't know what words like God even point to, right? You
Mm.
can't put God on the table and say, your story of God fits, because look, his hands are bigger than I said. You know. So that idea that words mean because they point to things only gets us so far. So what is meaning? And really, I think all meaning is what you end up with. It's just a shorthand for trying to make sense of things. And you never get 100% a sense. There's no such thing. You never get a complete story. There's no such thing. But at
Mm.
some point, you got enough to take the next step. And that enough, making just enough sense to move on or to, make sure the toaster is plugged in properly or check the brake or whatever it is. That's all meaning in. Meaning is just this word for the little pieces of making sense of things we use every step just to muddle through this life.
So, but what does it mean when cultures, and we're in the process of doing this, of cultures completely redefining big benchmarks? I mean, big things, not just um, a word like, oh, well, um, she's bad, which really means she's great. That's not a big deal. Trending things are not a big deal, but turning the world around and identifying or trying to rip or trying to unidentify very important things that make the basics take the basics of community and relationships and twist them so that you don't even know. Am I insulting someone right now? Did I just
Yeah,
insult
I hear what you're saying. But the problem there is that people have the wrong idea about words and the wrong idea about meaning, or not the wrong idea, but a less useful idea. Because I don't care, when you have two people, no, that's not marriage. Marriage is a relationship between a man and a woman for the purposes of procreation. No, no, no. Marriage is a symmetrical relationship, a romantic relationship between any two or more consenting adults. And
I'll even
the
take it one more
problem,
step.
but
It's
yeah, but
it's a contract between people to economically take care of each other.
sure, whatever. Here's the point. The problem is that people don't define the word definition and they don't know what they mean when they mean the word meaning. There is no such thing as the meaning of the word marriage or any other word. There's no such thing as the
Mm.
meaning of any word. So people claim the power to define the word and claim the power to reject other people's definition of the word. But that game's only possible if you buy into the lie that there's such a thing as the meaning of the word.
So
And
therefore, so if there is there's a flavor there. So a word has a flavor. Everybody understands the flavor. If you are attempting to deconstruct it consistently, that becomes a civilization breaker.
well,
Here we have people who will say, "Oh, the communists are attempting to, break the Western world down by sending people out and destroying the capitalist system through language." There's a little bit. There's a little bit there. Now, I'm not going to go
yeah,
down the conspiracy hole, but if you destroy the communication between people so that I can't even say a particular word to you to have a conversation without you flying off saying, I'm not safe in this conversation. We
yeah,
can't have this conversation. So that's where it becomes critical. And we have
yeah.
We have these.
What
I don't
I'm
know
just
why a
saying is,
conversation is going to make you feel unsafe, other than me saying to you, I'm going to come to your house and kill you. That would make me feel unsafe. But if I say to you, I don't believe in God, that shouldn't make you feel unsafe.
right. But in a way, we're just summarizing what we've been talking about in lots of ways, because words are just another example that as people become more individual and seek out a group of like-minded people, this idea that they can have the right meaning of the word helps sharpen the distinctions between different groups. So our first step is to let go of that idea and to say, okay, you have that, I have this meaning. Let's talk about the differences. That helps create a rapprochement. But we're getting very abstract here. Let me try to bring this back to, because the idea of what a word means and the meaning of life, those another recent blog post of mine, they overlap. So I'll tell you another story, which I think will bring this home in a way. Recently, I was in Brazil and I went to a ritual, and there was a secondary triage. Usually they first check, if you haven't been there for a while, they say, do you have ability? And if they think you have good spiritual ability, come back and we'll teach you to work with the spirits. But in this case, I was called up for a secondary triage. And, the head spirit incorporated in the body of the human head of the house came down the row, and in the voice of a caboclo spirit, an indigenous spirit, what is wrong with you, son? And I don't know what to say. I don't want to lie and make up problems. I'm usually there just to see what's going on. So I said, I'm a bit worried about the state of the world. And the spirit said, and moved on. And then one of the guys who was an assistant, not a medium that night, so him himself, who is the brother of my brother-in-law, came over and brought me up and said, they want you. So that was involved with a ritual that was going to expel a spirit that was in me or attached to me or something like that. I know the ritual. I'd never been part of it. Beautiful painted 4 equal arm cross on the floor. Sometimes 4 people. In this case, me at one end, I was told very carefully, do not let your feet touch the cross because there's a lot of energy there. So I made sure I was at my distance. And then the other. So there was a spirit, a negative, confused spirit was attached to me. And a spirit inside the body of a medium came over to me and pulled that spirit away and took that spirit and put the spirit in the body of another medium who was lying on the floor. And then another spirit in the body of another medium started talking to the spirit. I watched that happen at the other side of the room. So we have a spirit taken out of me by a spirit in a body, put into another body, and another spirit in another body talking to that spirit. And I know enough about Kardecism to know that what this ritual is less about getting a spirit out of me and more about educating this spirit who's confused. And they did that. But at the other end, there was a huge conversation between the spirit in this medium and the spirit in the body that had come in with that other person. And my spirit, the one that came out of me in its medium, just turned its head like this and refused to say a word. And I told my wife that story. She said, typical, because I'm known as pretty quiet when it comes to sitting around the table talking. So, and then I left. And here's the key point. I had no clue what any of this meant. I mean, I've read stuff in books. I have a general idea. What does it mean? So I had to go back and talk to my brother-in-law's brother and say, what was going on there? What that? And notice the only answer I get is an answer that comes within that community. Because the question, what does it mean, only makes sense within that community. And what he said was, oh, no, don't worry about it. That spirit's gone. He moved on. What you should feel is proud, because apparently I did a great act of charity, bringing the spirit in for its treatment. So I was just like a
A
seeing
vehicle.
eye dog,
Yeah.
helping the spirit, lead the spirit in where it could get some help. So that was reassuring. I was worried, like, do I have a spirit stuck to me? I'm somewhat agnostic, but at a certain point you wonder, well, what's going on here? But there's a crucial point. And we brings us back where we started, in a way, talking about community and tradition. That's what meaning is. And even if you get together with people who think like you, you're still just trying to create a new tradition. You're still just in a new community. And we have to have humility to recognize that the meanings other people have in their community deserve respect, not dismissal, but maybe discussion, negotiation, at the very least, an attempt to understand, not beginning with the idea that you already do understand enough to reject someone.
Mhm. It's I like to practice humility, and this is all about universal humility.
Yeah.
It's not about me. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it really feels like it's all about me. And even in that moment, it's not about me. It's about that spirit that needed. It's an interesting way to look on things. It's more than tolerance. It's inquisitiveness. It's the ability to say, I think I know, but if I don't know, maybe I'll discover something that I don't know. And then, on Tuesday of next week, I'll discover something else. It's okay. I was having a conversation with somebody, and they said, we were discussing purpose. And I said, what I feel people don't understand is that our purpose tends to flow. So I may be doing something for 365 days, and it may be very important to me. And suddenly it fades out, and it's like, okay, I've done it. Does that mean I have no purpose anymore? No, I've got maybe something else is going on. And these are not meant to be, I'm an activist and it's so important for me. These are very personal things. I want to learn how to knit, and it may become a purpose for a bit of time. And after I make the fifth sweater and people are saying, I don't need a sweater, thank you very much, you may say, oh, you know what? I'm going to make socks. I'm going to make a hat. You can still knit. Or you're going to say, I'm going to learn how to crochet now. Or sew. Or I'm giving it all up and I'm taking up swimming. I mean, we have these very personal goals, and they change. May not be part of identity, or it may be a part of your identity that it's in flow. I'm happy with that. I don't need to have the identity.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
the one thing I will say, and again, it's sort of like what you said, that it's that ritual. I think we all need to have some sort of ritual. It anchors us. We realize we're letting go of control because we have no control over this. So I have to go to the gym. Period. Have to. The end. Today. Monday morning at 9 o'clock. Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. I have to go. And when you stop going, you feel that.
yeah, and it's more important in times like the ones we're living in, where we feel like we are, chips of wood tossed by, waves and the wind,
Rocks
and
and rejects them.
we're out of control. Oh, there's all these, and so what? Even trivial rituals, which I'm not even sure they are rituals, like just going to the gym because we're doing it because we want to. But even bigger rituals, like making sure we always get together with that group of people, even if you don't feel like it, or even going to church, even if you're not a believer, because what those things do is it gives us a more manageable sort of dose of that sense of something that's outside our control. But it's one that we go to because it's positive. And I think that is so important, an important part of and function of ritual. In times where you are out of control because of forces outside your control, it's useful to choose places where you're out of control because you choose to let go in that safe environment. And that's what ritual is. I'm not in charge here, and that's okay because I want to be here for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. I could go around and around on this. Humans are very fascinating. I don't. I'm not the dualist to think of good and evil type of a thing where it's that simple. Yeah, there are bad things we do. Yes. And I don't know. I can't predict if we'll ever be those perfect individuals, because I don't see the point in it. I don't see us innovating if we're perfect. We just we flatline. It's in that spiritual world that some believe in. Is there a highest level? What happens at that highest level?
Different traditions have different answers, right? But
Mhm.
from where I sit, which is that, pretty well no level anywhere, but I go to a bunch of different religions, but I don't really practice any of them. That highest level is going to be described in different ways. So we can ask this question: if there's some kind of idea of improvement, not just perfection or absolute, but a direction of growth, what is that? And those stories are often stories of developing the kind of powers that we have anyway, powers of charity, of observation, of empathy. And so that's one of the positive things about religion and ritual. It's, for the most part, they're really trying to just amplify things we already think are the best part of other people.
Because as I said, the world is jam-packed with spirits. Once we leave the body, it's a city out there
Yes.
with billions and billions. Um, is there one spirit that keeps coming back? And what happens when the spirit comes back? Does it leave the energy? Does it leave the other world, or is it still in the other world?
Well, it depends on the religion. But I like Kardecism. I have a soft spot for Kardecism because the people I know who, my wife's aunt is a Kardecist. She and other people in her faith have the most positive, accepting attitudes towards death of any group I've ever met. Because, when her mother died, she was traveling, and they said, "Oh, you must have felt terrible. You couldn't get back to the funeral." And she was like, "No, I know I will meet her again. Will be reincarnated many times in different relationships, but our relationship is ongoing until we all end back with God." And so, from a Kardecist point of view, especially in Latin America, it's beautiful because not only does the spirit live this body and go to a higher level, which is like a more perfected echo of our reality. In some Kardecist works, there's like it's a city. It's like our world, but just it works better and it's more generous and everyone's positive. And then after a while, it comes back into another body because there's more to learn here. And while it's there, it can help the people who are alive here. But in Latin America, they emphasize that often people reincarnate in a same sort of little cast of characters. It's a
Mm.
bit like that the Atlas Shrugged, the movie version of that, except with the idea of spiritual evolution. And so I love Cardecist novels and sometimes TV series, novelas, or it will show a multi-incarnational love story. The couple meets in the Middle Ages, but they only get together in the 20th century, that sort of thing, lifetime after lifetime. That's a beautiful way of thinking about spirits as well, because it keeps it grounded in that idea of community.
Yeah, I've tried to understand and I tend to think of spiritualism. So if the spirit is in me, is it
You
also
mean you mean incorporated, because you are a
yeah,
spirit in you. That's who you
right,
are.
right,
But
the
you mean
spirit, right, right.
another spirit? Yeah.
But is it also floating around out there with other spirits? Is it 100% within me? And until I pass, or do I have other spirits? I mean, it gets very confusing.
Yeah, well, it depends on the religion. If you go to a neo-Pentecostal church, the pastors circulate and they'll find someone who has a bad case of being possessed. See, there the language is more the spirit's in control, the spirit is negative. And then the pastor will interview the spirit, and the spirit is chained by the power of Christ. And they'll sometimes there's 20,000 spirits in the person, demons they call them, and one who's sort of the spokes demon, the most powerful one. But in Umbanda, a person opens themselves to and invites a certain spirit. They know the spirit by name. It's an individual spirit, more advanced than them, and they have a lifelong relationship with this spirit. Usually, up to 7 or more spirits, and they work with the same cast of spirits, and they have a personal relationship with that spirit. In Kardecism, they don't believe the spirit can enter into you because the link between soul and body is indivisible. That's the way God made it. But what you can do is your soul sort of resonates with the spirit. And so that's one reason why Kardecism explains, if you have a problem with overeating, or you're losing your glasses all the time, or you're an envious person, you might attract a person who shares that weakness. And that's reason why you go to have the Kardecists talk to that spirit and push it away from you. And so it's not an exorcism, forcing a spirit out. It's an education session for the spirit. Why are you bothering this person? Get on with your own life. But Kardecism believes that we can work with spirits for better, and they can work with us for worse, but they can't enter into our body. So it depends on the tradition.
I have no words for so many words. It's been quite a pleasure talking with you.
Yes, thanks.
You had mentioned that you're on Substack. Remind us once again where people can find you on Substack.
You just search for my name or the blog title is called Religioning, as if doing religioning.
Religioning.
And I talk about stuff that's religion, stuff that's close to religion, and all sorts of things. But I certainly enjoyed this conversation, and it's very thought-provoking. When I talk to someone like you who asks, as you say, questions that are sometimes challenging, taking a different point of view, I come out knowing more clearly what I think. So it's great.
Well, you've certainly lent different meaning to some things, alike, or just and that's what people do for me all the time. I mean, they may say something that I may not necessarily have considered, and I'll be like, oh, isn't that interesting? I guess that would be the concept of having a different spirit into the body. It's the way it should be. We should be more allowing of dogs sitting on laps and annoying you. We should be more interested in other people for any amount of reason. I don't, we could talk another hour about safety, and I don't. Maybe some other time you can come back and we can talk about safety, because the helicopter and the safety issues of the day may be a trend that may disappear. It may just be something born out of, again, another hour of conversation, maybe something born out of the Cold War, this concept of safety. And it continues to permeate in a society that the Cold War is not necessarily the backdrop anymore. It's worse. It's different, but it's not the Cold War. So it's not the Russians or the Chinese necessarily, although some people will have that conversation. Oh, it's the communists that are doing. But the concept of Cold War and the need for safety and the coddling that has grown, where a kid can't walk out the door. I used to be gone till 5 o'clock at night. No problem. Just make sure you're home before it's dark. Where were you? I was at Kathy's house. Oh, was her mother home? Yeah. Okay. And eventually my mom would talk to Kathy's mother. Is she really hanging out there? Yeah. Okay. That's it. Like, she trusted me. How old was I? 12? I took my bicycle out and I went over to Kathy's house. But today, you have to drive me to Kathy's house. You have to talk to Kathy's mom. Have to make sure that Kathy's brother's not there. So that's safe to, I don't want to go there. Although I just...
Yeah. That would take us that'd be a whole other long conversation, because at one end, it's the erosion of community. Then community simply was safer because there were eyes, And at the other end, we're talking about the way anxiety facilitates the commodification inside the individual. We're being broken up into pieces: attention, what we spend, how we sleep, where we look. And anxiety helps make us more easily manipulable. Obviously, that's only part of the question, but yeah, whole other discussion there.
Whole other. The commoditization of anxiety, where it becomes something in itself. Like you have to be anxious about something, and we can take care of that.
More that anxiety is a fear, and then our attempt to avoid that anxiety can be channeled in different ways. And again, religions have lots of answers to that question.
Right. Stephen, thank you. I'm going to shut up now.
It was a pleasure. I know you'll edit this up, and that sounds great. I hope that was fun. I certainly enjoyed the conversation. It was great.
I treasure the conversation. I really do.
Have a great day.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap.
Sounds good.